night on Nation to Nation. Secret recording.
I thought it was offensive. I thought it was just cultural misrepresentation.
An Algonquin researcher at an Ottawa think tank captures his boss's racist comments. Under surveillance.
Well, it angers me. I mean, this is the typical thing that the government does.
A well-known Mohawk policy analyst is named in an RCMP intelligence report. And life under Trump.
But Trump would approve that in a heart. He'd further militarize and further escalate the situation on the ground out there.
A Native American congressional candidate braces for an uglier America. This is Nation to Nation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Veldon Coburn was a researcher with the Conference Board of Canada. After the Ottawa think tank landed a contract with Correctional Service of Canada to develop an employment training program aimed at Indigenous inmates, he was assigned to drop the plan. But Coburn was bothered by what Correctional Service of Canada wanted, which he viewed as pure tokenism. He then took the issue to his boss and recorded the exchange.
It's just when they present this to us and say, like, you know, we need to present this to be able to teach to Aboriginal inmates, and then it's, you know, this is their culture, and
I don't think it's that's the right language to be able to teach them. I think they're trying to make it interesting, and they're trying to give them some things where they see themselves.
That audio clip is part of a recording made in September by Veldon Coburn, a former researcher with the Conference Board of Canada. It's from a conversation he had with his boss, Michael Bloom, a vice president at the Conference Board. It's about a project for Correctional Service of Canada. Joining me now to talk about this is Veldon Coburn. Hey, Veldon, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, tell us a little bit about this audio recording. First of all, how did you do, why and how did you obtain this recording?
Well, the audio recording was done just because these comments were made so frequently in my former workplace that I had become a little bit, I guess, worn down by them. So it was time to garner a little bit of evidence, and many of the coworkers had discussed this. And
so what were you discussing? What was this issue about? Like, he called you in to meet with him, and you had I guess you used a phone or something to record that? Like, what was the context of this? Right,
it was just an app on my iPhone, but the conversation was about Indigenous peoples in a training program we were developing for a contract for the Government of Canada, for Correctional Service Canada. But it concerned Indigenous culture and Indigenous peoples, and it was quite disconcerting.
Okay, we're going to play another clip from this recording.
You know, I think in the case of for Indigenous people, you'll see more often, at least from what I've read, people who will be silent. You know, the thing is, you know, yes, you get the person who punched somebody, but the silence thing is an issue.
So he read this somewhere about silence. I'm just wondering, what is going on here? What was he talking about? How did he get on this issue? Well,
this was just one comment in a whole array of you know, racial prejudices that had been floated towards me, and in which I had expressed significant misgivings about. Aboriginal people in employment situations are, you know, less desirable to be employed because, as a race, as I was being, you know, told, have certain behaviors that make them less employable.
You're Algonquin, and are you silent? Do you think you're...
No, I've never heard this stereotype, and I would never judge any other Indigenous person based on, you know, these sweeping claims. I wouldn't base my hiring upon prejudices that I would have towards a race or ascribe these broad negative behaviors that...
So Indigenous people wasn't the only generalization that Mr. Bloom made. There was other ethnic groups that he also discussed. Based on this recording, we're going to play one of that clip right now.
I'm sure that in Toronto there would be it would be helpful to produce a employability skills where the examples come out of the Caribbean community, because there's a lot of those people from the Caribbean community in jail. In the Asian case, the example we had was somebody who couldn't say no. Like, as you know, in Asia, sometimes yes means no.
sometimes yes means no. So you're sitting there and you're listening to this. What was going through your mind?
Well, I mean, he had rattled off quite a few racial and cultural stereotypes that were making me, deeply uncomfortable. The whole impetus of getting this on tape was because there were some deeply hurtful statements made in the past, but it was quite commonplace. So, yeah, I would never ascribe these behaviors to any group of people and think that they're not employable because I have these, misunderstandings about how they are as a person and based upon what somebody else in their own group may have done.
Now, this project was actually a contract that the Conference Board of Canada had with Correctional Service of Canada. Tell me a little bit about what this contract was about and what agency within the Correctional Service of Canada was actually behind this.
Right. Well, some of the comments may just seem like, run-of-the-mill racial stereotypes, negative behaviors of Asians, Caribbeans, Indigenous peoples. But it was all for a larger project for CORCAN, which is a, revenue-generating corporation, actually, that operates within Correctional Service Canada.
So they get inmates to produce products that are then sold for revenue, right?
Right, yes. So CORCAN actually runs these shops that actually manufacture quite a bit of product that is sold throughout Canada.
And this is one of some of their products here? What's...
Right, so I found it actually a little bit, actually quite a bit offensive that they had a shop within one of their institutions where they wanted to have Indigenous peoples work to produce moccasins and dream catchers and these other stereotypical icons that we see throughout this imagery here.
And they actually wanted this to inform the examples of the training?
Right. So they were telling me that this was Aboriginal culture. They wanted this reflected in training examples to be delivered to Aboriginal people within their institutions. I had pushed back quite a bit. I thought it was offensive. I thought it was just cultural misrepresentation, and it really was tokenizing.
So they wanted to develop as part of their national employability. What was that?
It was a skills program.
A skills program. So they wanted the skills program, part of it tailored specifically for Indigenous inmates, right?
That's right. And to have Indigenous people, I guess, mass produce these products that they said were Aboriginal culture. So.
And they obviously will end up selling these products at some point.
That's right. So I found it a little bit offensive that we were putting Indigenous people to work with stereotyped artifacts from, various diverse Indigenous cultures that don't even reflect the contemporary existence of Indigenous peoples today, without giving it any context. And in the context, they're in prison producing as punishment for maybe $3, $4, $5 a day, producing products that have been pulled out of their culture, held up as Indigenous by non-Indigenous peoples for mass production and sale.
Now, you actually, I read some of the, you provided us with some of the emails of your exchanges with the Correctional Service of Canada officials. You actually gave them a suggestion of where they should go if they were really serious about developing training that was culturally sensitive, specific, what have you. You actually gave them some suggestions. What was the suggestion that you offered?
Yeah, well, when they first came to me, they said that they wanted to teach Indigenous peoples how to count beads and moccasins, and I thought that was pretty offensive. I thought we had gone past all this. We know that the history textbooks, the social science textbooks that we learned in school that contain these relic and stereotypical imagery was not reflective of Indigenous peoples, and it was deeply disrespectful. So I had suggested, well, hey, if you're going to do a training program and develop an educational curriculum, do it properly. First Nations people have been fighting for control and input into educational and training programs. Go to the First Nations Educational Steering Committee. It is
in BC.
In British Columbia, that's right. And it's an extraordinarily professional, they produce exceptional work in this regard. To go there if they're going to do it. Don't drop in a few token examples here that actually do more harm than good.
And you never heard back from them on that issue, eh?
Not on that particular issue, but they continue to press on including these particular objects in the training program.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing this issue and these recordings with us. It's something that we are definitely digging into to see, what is up and what's going to happen as a result of what you've exposed. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Coburn recently left the think tank. Now, the Conference Board of Canada sent NationToNation a statement from its CEO, Daniel Mizka. It says, "We take these allegations very seriously and have referred the investigation to the attention of our external independent ethics officer. He will conduct a full investigation of the matter." The Conference Board also said its Vice President, Michael Bloom, is currently on a leave of absence. After the break, we speak with the Mohawk policy analyst who ended up on an RCMP intelligence report. This is NationToNation. I'm Jorge Barrera. The RCMP's National Intelligence Coordination Center produced a report where it revealed that it created a list of 89 Indigenous rights activists it considers threats. The report was released under the Access to Information Act to 2 Ottawa researchers. All the names of the individuals on the list were redacted, but one name escaped the censors, Russ Diabo, a Mohawk policy analyst. The report described him as a spokesperson for the Defenders of the Land. Thanks for joining us, Russ.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk to you about this Project SITKA intelligence report that actually mentions you. You seem to be the only individual who passed through the censors. You're named in association as a spokesperson for the Defenders of the Land, and the report actually quotes you. It quotes a statement that you made about Canada being at war with First Nations. I'm just wondering, how do you feel about being named in this report?
Well, it angers me. I mean, this is the typical thing that the government does, particularly the police and intelligence agencies. I think that targeting Indigenous peoples, as national threats, that's what this report is about. It's naming organizations like Defenders of the Land. It's talking about criminality. And as far as I know, the Defenders of the Land has never been involved in any criminality. Certainly in relation to what they're talking about in the report. The only thing I've done is be critical of federal government land claims and self-government policies. And, I did do an article talking about Canada being at war with First Nations. And it's my view that the way they're interpreting the Constitution, Section 35, to deny Aboriginal treaty rights, that is my right to critique the government on their policies. And, I don't think it's fair that they've singled me out as the only person who isn't redacted. Everybody else is redacted in the document except me. So I don't know if that's an oversight or if they're targeting me. But I've contacted legal counsel looking at my options for legal recourse on this.
So do you think that they consider your ideas dangerous? Is this why you made it in, especially that statement about Canada being at war with First Nations? Like, what do you think is the threat that they see in this?
Well, I think I'm the one that has introduced into the national lexicon the term termination tables and termination plan of the federal government. I think they are concerned about my critique of the federal and provincial policies, which are out to basically deny the land rights and self-determination of Indigenous peoples. That's what I do. Is I'm a policy analyst. I analyze this and I point out how the policies work in practice on the ground. So I think they do find my ideas dangerous, apparently.
Well, do you think that, they have this list of 89 people. Do you think that Indigenous rights activists should be concerned about this?
Yeah, I think what they're doing is they're doing protester profiles and putting them in a database for future use. That smacks of Big Brother to me, because when Indigenous activists or individuals are doing protests, legitimate protest and dissent, they have the right to do so under Canada's charter. And this seems to me to be a pretty heavy-handed measure to start creating databases where our people are going to be placed into those databases for identification by local police officers.
Okay. And just to wrap this up, I'm just wondering, we have, Standing Rock unfolding, basically as we speak in North Dakota. This report was triggered by Idle No More and the LC Bucktuck anti-shale gas, demonstrations and conflict there. I'm just wondering, are we entering into another sort of era or phase of heightened tensions, do you think?
Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, we've already seen the Trudeau government watering down their promise to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, free, prior, informed consent. They're replacing it with this domestic legal concept of consultation, the duty to consult. And we can see that that's led to them approving the Site C Dam in British Columbia, the LNG project at Leilu Island in British Columbia, and most likely the pipeline in British Columbia that they're talking about. And so by watering down this international human rights standard, by going with the Canadian standard, I think you're going to see resource conflicts occurring between Indigenous peoples and companies and governments across the country.
Okay.
Particularly over pipelines.
Well, thanks for joining us to chat about this, Russ. And we're going to obviously stay on top of this issue and see what happens with your legal recourse. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
After the break, life under Trump. Stay with us. This is Nation to Nation. I'm Jorge Barrera. Chase Iron Eyes is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and a well-known Native American rights activist. He ran as a congressional candidate in North Dakota for the Democrats. But he was swamped by the Republican wave that swept through his state and put Donald Trump into the White House. A Trump presidency is something many people thought would never become a reality, but it did this week. Chase Iron Eyes joins me now to talk Trump. Joining us now is Chase Iron Eyes. Chase, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Jorge.
So, wow, the election results, Trump presidency. I'm just wondering, what do you think this result says about America?
Yes, I mean, it's a challenging time right now. I also lost my bid for the U.S. Congress I ran against a guy who was a Trump surrogate. A lot of us bet that America as a country had progressed, had evolved, had entered a process of kind of social equalization where we respect each other's rights, where we were on a forward, upward, and onward trajectory. But Trump's victory, we have yet to see what it means, but it spells serious and even dangerous times for certain protected classes of people, whether they're gay, whether they're Muslim or of a certain religion, whether they're American Indian, whether they're tribal nations, whether they're women, whether they're black, whatever class of folks might have been, which were historically oppressed. Those are the protected classes who, we had a lot of gains through a lot of sacrifices, a lot of legal victories over the last couple hundred years. And now all of those things are at risk of being rescinded. And so, I don't know how it's going to play out, but I just know that we all need to be woke. We all need to stay woke, because all of those superficial but very exploitable differences, like your skin color, phenotype, your religion, your race, your sexual gender, or whatever, all of those are very effective cover to go after and usurp your constitutional, your human, and your basic civil rights. And that's what's at risk.
What do you think this means on the ground in North Dakota as the Standing Rock tribe continues its battle, and all its supporters and Native American tribes all across the country fighting this oil pipeline. Do you think this will embolden law enforcement?
Yeah, I think we're seeing an uptick in that already, where people are emboldened to attempt racially charged assaults and conflicts. You see these reports, and now they're just on social media, but as far as law enforcement, absolutely. The county in which the pipeline is set to go through, right north of the reservation, is called Morton County. They had an actual fireworks display when it was announced that Trump had won the presidency. And so Trump, in his first 100 days of office, has committed to even bringing back the Keystone XL pipeline. It's been proven that Trump has financial interests in the Dakota Access Pipeline. So that the pipeline fight, in my mind, only has about, 2 weeks even. The pipeline company is saying it's going to drill under the water, whether or not it has the permit, kind of hinting that it's willing to take action first and suffer the fine later. But Trump would approve that in a heart. He'd further militarize and further escalate the situation on the ground out there.
Now, in the past, Trump has gone before joint committees in the House. He's blasted Native Americans. He's attacked their casino, Native American gaming. He's been outright racist about the Indigenous people in the United States. I'm just wondering, is sort of the gaming, Native American gaming, under threat? I mean, he went to court to fight it before, so do you think this is a threat as well?
Yeah, well, I think tribal nations are, they're always under threat. But now we have a blatant and proud Indian fighter, a bigot, a guy who lacks respect for others who are different from him. And he's made public comments already. He's testified before Congress that certain people, quote unquote, don't look Indian. And so I would venture to say that almost all, unless the tribal nation is creating its own wealth, that all of the wealth that flows through tribal national economies stems either directly from federal sources or comes from sources of revenue which are authorized and subject to the authority of Congress. So the Congress is two houses, both controlled by Trump's party. The Republican Party now controls the executive in both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House. He's going to have a Supreme Court appointment. So tribal nations will find out what sovereignty really means, whether or not we can provide food, water, shelter, and energy for ourselves outside of a federal regime.
Wow. Well, we're going to be watching this closely, and I know you're obviously going to continue to be involved as things unfold. So thank you so much for informing us about what's going on the ground right now. Thank you.
Anytime.
All right. Talk soon. That's all the time we have for Nation and Nation tonight. Next week, the House of Commons resumes and our political panel will be back. So tune in. I'm Jorge Barrera. Good night.